The studio lights burned bright, casting a polished glow across the stage of The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. It was supposed to be just another evening of political banter mixed with humor. Colbert, the witty host known for skewering politicians with a grin, leaned casually on his desk as the audience applauded. The cameras rolled, the laughter flowed, and the script was tight. But then, the guest chair wasn't filled by the usual politician looking for easy laughs. It was Denzel Washington. Calm, deliberate, and grounded, he walked out with a quiet intensity. The crowd erupted, surprised and thrilled to see him. Colbert stretched out his hand with a wide smile, already preparing a punchline. Denzel Washington, everybody. Finally, a man who could play me in a biopic, if I were 20 times cooler. The audience laughed, but Denzel didn't even crack a smile. He simply sat down, leaning forward slightly, his voice low but firm. "Stephen," he said, "there are some things we can't laugh off anymore. Not tonight." The room shifted. The audience sensed this wasn't going to be the easy, joke-filled segment they'd expected. Colbert blinked, caught off guard, but tried to brush it off with humor. "Well, Denzel, this is a comedy show. We do jokes here. Don't worry, I've got a few Gaza one-liners ready to break the tension." But before he could continue, Denzel raised a hand. "That's exactly the problem," he said, his voice cutting through the laughter. "People are dying, Stephen. And you want to make jokes?" The laughter evaporated instantly. The studio, once filled with chuckles, fell into uneasy silence. Colbert shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the grin on his face faltering as the weight of Denzel's words sank into the room. The host, always quick with a comeback, tapped his pen against the desk as though stalling for time. "Denzel," he began, "this show has always tackled tough topics with humor. It's how people process the world. It's catharsis." The audience murmured, some nodding in agreement, but others uneasy. Denzel didn't move, his hands clasped together, his eyes locked on Colbert. "Catharsis for who?" he asked, his tone calm but sharp as steel. "For the people safe here in this studio? Or for the families in Gaza who don't have homes anymore? Whose children don't make it to school the next morning? You think they're laughing, Stephen?" The silence was suffocating. Even the cameras seemed to hold their breath. Colbert straightened in his chair, his smile gone, his voice sharper now. "Hold on. Are you accusing me of making light of tragedy? I bring awareness. People talk about Gaza because of shows like mine." But Denzel leaned forward, closing the space between them without raising his voice. "Awareness without honesty is just noise. You joke about Gaza one minute, then you sit down with politicians the next, never pressing them on their contradictions. That isn't awareness, it's entertainment. And when you blur those lines, Stephen, the truth gets lost." Gasps rippled through the crowd. This wasn't the kind of exchange they were used to seeing here. Colbert, usually in control, looked rattled. His pen slipped from his hand, clattering onto the desk. The camera zoomed closer, catching every detail of the tension etched on both men's faces. For the first time in years, the audience wasn't laughing with Colbert, they were watching him being challenged in his own house. The tension on set was electric, like a storm cloud rolling over a quiet city. Colbert leaned back in his chair, visibly trying to regain control of the stage that had always been his domain. His voice dropped, sharper now, carrying a defensive edge. "Denzel, this isn't a press conference. It's a late-night show. People tune in to laugh, to escape the horrors of the world. You're asking me to be a journalist when I'm an entertainer." His words triggered a ripple of applause from a few in the crowd, loyal fans trying to restore the balance. But Denzel didn't flinch. He sat upright, his tone steady, deliberate, every word landing with the weight of someone who had thought long and hard about this moment. "No, Stephen. I'm asking you to be human first. To stop hiding behind comedy when the stakes are life and death. Gaza isn't just another headline, it's a wound on humanity, and every joke made at its expense pours salt into that wound. The applause died instantly. The studio audience, caught between loyalty to their beloved host and the undeniable gravity of Denzel's words, grew silent again. Colbert forced a smirk, trying to salvage his authority. "So what, Denzel? You want me to come out here every night and just preach? Turn the show into a sermon? Nobody would watch that." Denzel shook his head slowly. "It's not about preaching. It's about courage. The courage to ask real questions instead of turning pain into punchlines. You've got one of the biggest platforms in the country, Stephen. And instead of holding leaders accountable, you make them comfortable." The crowd gasped, phones in the audience lifted, recording every second. Colbert's face reddened, not from embarrassment but from anger. For once, the king of satire wasn't the one writing the narrative, he was living in someone else's script, and Denzel was holding the pen. The cameras caught the slightest twitch in Colbert's jaw, the look of a man who suddenly realized laughter wasn't going to save him this time. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, trying to shift the power dynamic back in his favor. "You're painting me as some kind of villain, Denzel. But let's be honest, what good does it do for me to sit here and lecture the American people about Gaza when they already feel powerless?" His tone carried an almost desperate energy, as if he were reaching for the invisible strings that usually let him control the room. Denzel, however, remained composed. He uncrossed his legs, leaned slightly toward Colbert, and spoke with the calm authority of someone used to holding uncomfortable truths. "Powerlessness isn't an excuse, Stephen. It's a challenge. The people feel powerless because voices like yours, with platforms this big, choose entertainment over empathy. They don't need another monologue, they need honesty." A murmur rose from the crowd, not hostile, not supportive, but tense, like the breath before a storm. Colbert gave a quick, bitter laugh, more a defense mechanism than amusement. "So now you're telling me how to do my job?" Denzel's gaze didn't waver. "I'm reminding you why you have this job in the first place. To tell stories that matter. And if you can't laugh at Gaza because it's too raw, then maybe that's exactly why you should talk about it without the laugh track." For the first time in his career, Colbert seemed cornered not by a heckler, not by a rival comedian, but by the truth itself. The audience leaned in, some whispering, others frozen. The energy wasn't comedy anymore, it was confrontation, and everyone in that room knew history was being made in real time. Colbert's fingers drummed nervously on the desk, the rhythm betraying the unease he tried to hide behind a thin smile. He raised his hand toward the audience, as if to steady them, and then spoke with forced composure. "Okay, let's slow down. Gaza is tragic, yes. But this is the Late Show, not CNN. People want to laugh before bed, not cry." His words tried to create distance, to place a barrier between the stage and the suffering thousands of miles away. Yet the studio's atmosphere refused to shift back into comedy. Denzel leaned forward, his voice measured but sharp. "And that's the problem, Stephen. Tragedy doesn't wait for airtime. Those people don't get to turn it off before bed. The bombs don't stop so your ratings can stay high." The audience gasped softly, the weight of his words dragging them further into silence. Colbert's smile faltered, but he pressed on, searching for familiar ground. "So what, you expect me to become an activist now? To abandon comedy altogether?" Denzel shook his head, a quiet authority in his tone. "I expect you to stop pretending comedy excuses cowardice. You've mocked presidents, exposed hypocrisy, made millions laugh. But when it comes to Gaza, your silence is louder than any monologue." That line cut through the air like glass shattering. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, some clapped hesitantly, others just stared, phones lifted, knowing they were capturing something that would trend worldwide within minutes. Colbert opened his mouth to fire back, but the words caught in his throat. For the first time in years, the master of late-night satire had nothing to say. Denzel didn't gloat, didn't smirk, he simply sat back, his calmness the sharpest weapon of all. The camera zoomed in, catching every flicker of emotion on Colbert's face. He forced a chuckle, a hollow sound that fooled no one, then gestured toward Denzel with exaggerated flair. "Ladies and gentlemen, Denzel Washington, actor, activist, and apparently tonight's moral compass." The audience gave a nervous laugh, but it was thin, scattered, nowhere near the roaring applause Colbert usually commanded. Denzel didn't even blink. He waited until the laughter died on its own, then spoke softly, every word echoing louder because of his restraint. "You think this is about me, Stephen? About making me the story? It's not. It's about the children buried under rubble while the world argues semantics on TV." A hush fell so heavy that even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Colbert tried to interject, but Denzel leaned in slightly, his voice a steady rhythm. "You've built a career on being fearless, taking shots at power, saying the uncomfortable thing. But when Gaza comes up, suddenly it's safer to joke about celebrity divorces than dead civilians. Why is that?" Colbert's face flushed. He raised a finger, searching for a witty retort, but the crowd was no longer on his side. They were watching Denzel, hanging on his words, the way one listens to a truth they've been waiting to hear out loud. Colbert's lips pressed tight, a faint tremor in his jaw. For years, he had been the one controlling the silences, dictating when an audience laughed, when they gasped. But tonight, Denzel owned the silence, and Colbert sat in it, exposed. The audience's unease grew into a slow murmur, not against Denzel, but against the realization that their host, their trusted jester of politics, had no answer. Colbert adjusted his tie, his hands betraying a nervous twitch. He forced another smile, this one tighter, almost brittle. "So, what's your solution, Denzel? You sit here, criticize me, criticize comedy, but do you actually have an answer for Gaza? Or is this just righteous outrage dressed up for prime time?" His tone was sharper now, almost combative, trying desperately to turn the tables. Denzel leaned back, calm but unyielding, and then responded with the kind of clarity that cut through the noise. "The answer starts with honesty, Stephen. Stop pretending neutrality is harmless. Neutrality in the face of oppression is complicity. And every time we choose silence, or worse, a punchline, we tell the oppressed their pain is less valuable than our comfort." The words landed heavy, echoing across the studio. A woman in the front row nodded, tears welling up as she whispered something to the person beside her. Colbert's eyes flickered toward the audience, sensing the shift. He tried again, his voice louder, more defensive. "You can't expect a late-night host to solve foreign policy." Denzel didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. "No one asked you to solve it. They asked you to acknowledge it. To use your influence to amplify truth, not bury it under jokes." The silence that followed was suffocating. The audience wasn't laughing. They weren't clapping. They were just listening. Colbert's smirk faded, replaced by something rarer, a glimpse of doubt. The show's usual rhythm had collapsed, and for once, the stage belonged not to the comedian, but to the actor who refused to play small. Phones in the audience captured every second, hashtags already forming in real time. Colbert had asked for an answer. Denzel had given one, and it stung. The studio felt like it had slipped into another dimension, one where the usual rules of late-night television no longer applied. Colbert sat stiffly, his grin now gone, eyes darting toward the producers offstage as if searching for rescue. But no cue cards, no earpiece, no clever cut to commercial could save him from the gravity of the moment. He leaned forward again, his voice lower, almost pleading. "Denzel, you're asking me to risk my platform, my career, everything I've built. Do you know what happens when people in my position take sides on issues this divisive? We lose sponsors. We lose viewers. The show dies." His words carried a raw edge of truth, a glimpse of the fear behind the satire. But Denzel's response was sharper than any punchline Colbert had ever delivered. And do you know what happens when people in Gaza don't get to speak at all? They lose their lives. Their homes. Their children. And you're worried about losing ad revenue? Gasps rippled through the audience, the kind of sound that couldn't be scripted. Colbert blinked hard, his composure cracking, the mask of the confident entertainer slipping away. "That's not fair," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Denzel leaned in, eyes steady, tone calm yet unshakable. "What's unfair, Stephen, is pretending neutrality costs more than silence. You don't need to carry Gaza on your shoulders. But you also don't need to look away. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do with a joke is to refuse to make it." The audience erupted, not with laughter, not with applause, but with a low, collective murmur that signaled agreement. Phones lit up brighter than the studio lights, clips already flying across timelines. Colbert looked down at his desk, cornered not by politics, but by conscience. The cameras lingered on Colbert, his face caught between defiance and defeat. He rubbed his temples, then tried one last swing. "So what, you think you have the moral high ground just because you're willing to sit here and scold me on national television? People don't tune in for lectures, Denzel. They tune in for laughs, for escape. You think the average American wants to go to bed thinking about Gaza?" His words were sharper now, carrying the heat of a man cornered. But Denzel didn't rise to the bait. He tilted his head slightly, his expression calm, almost sorrowful. "Maybe they should, Stephen. Maybe that's the problem. We've all gotten too comfortable escaping the truth. Too used to treating suffering as background noise. You don't have to turn your stage into a pulpit, but you also don't get to hide behind laughter while people die." The audience shifted in their seats, whispers cutting through the heavy silence. Colbert's eyes flickered toward the camera, as if begging it to cut away, but it stayed locked on him, exposing his unease to millions watching at home. Denzel leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper that still carried across the room. "Comedy has power. You've used it to challenge presidents, to shape conversations. But when it comes to Gaza, your silence doesn't protect you, it betrays you." A few audience members clapped, tentatively at first, then more joined, until the sound rolled across the studio like a wave. Colbert sat frozen, his smile gone, his hand clenched into a fist on the desk. For once, he wasn't the man with the last word. The studio lights glared above, merciless and unflinching, as if even they refused to soften the weight of the truth. The final minutes of the broadcast felt nothing like a comedy show. The laughter had long since evaporated, replaced by a suffocating tension that even the cameras couldn't disguise. Colbert sat back, his usual armor of wit and satire stripped away. He tried one last time, his voice thin but still defiant. "You think calling me out on air changes anything? Tomorrow the headlines will spin it, and the world will move on." Denzel folded his hands, his gaze steady, a quiet strength radiating from his posture. Maybe the world moves on. But not everyone forgets. Sometimes a moment like this plants a seed. Someone at home sees this and realizes silence isn't the only option. That's where change begins, Stephen, not in headlines, but in hearts. The words landed heavier than any joke could. The audience erupted, not in laughter, but in thunderous applause, raw and unfiltered. Some stood, clapping hard, others recorded feverishly, knowing they were capturing history disguised as television. Colbert's lips tightened, his eyes downcast. For the first time in years, the king of late night didn't have control of the narrative. Denzel, calm and composed, adjusted his blazer and sat back, letting the moment breathe. He didn't gloat. He didn't need to. The silence that followed was more powerful than any punchline. The show cut to its closing theme, but the energy in the studio didn't fade. Online, within minutes, hashtags exploded, hashtag Denzel Truthbomb, hashtag Colbert silenced, hashtag Gaza on air. Clips of the exchange spread like wildfire, sparking debates across platforms. Some praised Denzel as fearless, others accused him of hijacking the show, but no one could deny the impact. In the dressing room afterward, Denzel looked into the mirror, his reflection calm, resolute. This wasn't about winning an argument, it was about refusing to shrink in the face of injustice. He whispered to himself, "Silence protects no one." And in that moment, he knew. The world had just witnessed a line being drawn, live on air. What we witnessed tonight wasn't just a debate, it was a reminder. Truth cannot be buried under jokes. Silence does not erase injustice. Denzel's words showed us that sometimes the strongest weapon is a calm voice carrying undeniable truth. Colbert tried to laugh it off, but reality drowned the laughter. And this moment doesn't end in the studio, it echoes far beyond.